Losing its religion will examine the state of the Catholic Church in Ireland amid calls for a referendum on its tough abortion laws. And after the damage of abuse scandals around the world, we'll ask what the future holds for the world's most popular Christian faith. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Ireland has some of the strictest laws on abortion of any country in the world, but they could be challenged if the government gives the go-ahead for a referendum on the issue later this year. The Catholic Church once dominated every aspect of life, but from the abuse scandal to changes in society and attitudes to faith, the Emerald Isle has seen a huge shift in the relationship between the Church, the state and its people. Insight's Tadhg Enright reports from the Irish capital, Dublin.
He is a light in the darkness for the upright. He is generous, merciful, and just.
In the 20th century, Pope Paul V described Ireland as the most Catholic country in the world.
The Lord be with you.
Its devotion, born out of centuries of religious persecution by British colonialists who sought to convert the Irish to Protestantism. The vast majority attended Mass at least once a week up until the 1970s. Today, it's fewer than 1 in 5. Ireland is losing its religion, and the state is struggling to catch up.
When you look around the church this morning, it's all either very, very young children with their parents or older people. And maybe 20 years down the road, you'll see a lot emptier churches.
The younger generation, better educated, sees the world in a different place than we did when we were growing up.
If you describe the Catholic Church as a vessel, and the vessel has been cracked, and while that might cause weakness, it also allows the light to come in.
We have a very good congregation here.
Father Philip Curran believes his parish is one that's bucking the trend.
But I was ordained in 1981, 36 years ago, and I can honestly say that the church that I was ordained for doesn't exist anymore.
So why has it changed?
Well, part of it is the change in society. You know, there's the increased globalization, the mix of cultures coming into Ireland. We were a very homogenous group. The Catholic Church was our identity, that's what held us together. I think too that the scandals in the church have been absolutely devastating. Stuff came to light that really would horrify anybody.
The first revelations of child sexual abuse by Catholic priests emerged in the 1990s. The stories followed a similar pattern. Paedophile priests who molested children were moved to another parish when complaints were made. The church made no effort to stop them. A government commission concluded that thousands of boys and girls had been raped, physically abused and terrorized in church-run schools and orphanages.
Some people might point the finger squarely on those abuse scandals, but do you think is it bigger than that?
Oh, I think it's a much bigger picture than that. I think it's a complex relationship now. You would have a very small, vocal, anti-church cohort in Ireland who really would want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's probably a kickback, it's probably a backlash to the, I suppose, control that the church had in Irish society. And it was a very controlling presence. I think people have shaken that model off completely, and they're not prepared to be dictated to.
With its moral authority now in question, the Church failed to convince a majority of voters in 1995 to maintain Ireland's constitutional ban on divorce. In 2015, Irish voters chose to allow same-sex couples to marry, the first country in the world to do so by popular vote. And soon it's expected that Ireland's ban on abortion, except in the case where the mother's life is in danger, will be put before voters for the third time in 35 years.
It's a very mixed mood.
Conservative campaigners who fought and lost on gay marriage will try to persuade the public to maintain the status quo.
The anti-abortion campaign last time might have relied on church teaching. Will they do so again this time?
Ireland is a very different place, and while faith is still a very big issue in Ireland, there are many, many people now who weren't even born in 1983 who are going to be campaigning on this and who are going to be doing it for very secular reasons. I think for most of the people that I know that are involved, if they lost their faith in the morning, they wouldn't change their views on abortion.
The modern Irish state is less than 100 years old. In its infancy, it relied on the Catholic Church to deliver many public services, such as hospitals and schools. Today, the government has to deal with a tricky problem of how to cater for a growing population of people who don't want the Church to have any influence over their children's education.
The difficulty in Ireland is that in conjunction with the population moving on, the state has stayed still. The state is still shackled to a 1937 constitution that was put in place when the Catholic Church did have control over the people, and so the government now says, well, we have to keep this religious discrimination in place because we're constitutionally obliged to.
While the rest of the Western world embraced the sexual revolution of the 1960s, the Catholic Church was at the peak of its influence in Ireland, building monumental places of worship to make up for lost time when the British forbid them from doing so. But times have changed.
50 years have passed now since this cathedral-sized church opened in a fairly normal Dublin suburb, but it won't survive many more. The Church of the Annunciation will soon be demolished and replaced by a smaller church with 1/10 of the capacity.
As in the rest of the country, a church will continue here, but it won't dominate like it used to. Ty Genwright reporting for Insight in Dublin.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Maria Power, a lecturer in religion and peace building at the University of Liverpool. Also with us is Harry Farley, a journalist from the UK's largest online Christian news provider, Christian Today. Welcome to both of you. Maria, is this purely an age thing? The older folks are still faithful, the younger simply are not.
No, I think that's quite a simplistic way of looking at it. I think Ireland is now entering a period of secularisation when the rest of Europe is going into post-secularisation. So in the first 60 years of the state, you see a very devout populace. But then from the 1960s onwards, you see an intelligentsia arriving in the country who start to question the hold that the Catholic Church has over society, and that is now starting to filter through. This has also been helped by the increase in the economy there and the Europeanisation of Irish society. So since the 1990s, we really have been seeing a change. And I think you have faithful young people and faithful old people, and that the secularisation that we're seeing is actually happening across the demographic board.
Because, Harry, this used to define Ireland, didn't it? I mean, it was to be Catholic that the Irish state sort of came into being.
Yes, and the Catholic Church has a huge moral and social legacy there, and it used to command a great amount of respect in rural and urban areas. And I think probably to some extent rural areas have still held on to their more faithful respect for the local
further split there,
yeah,
I think between the two.
Yeah, you do.
And is it the case then that you said the Europeanisation? So you think that the population is being diluted, do you think, and therefore attitudes are being diluted too?
Yes, I think there's kind of two issues coming on board. Ireland, in many ways, was a closed society up until it joined the European Union, and becoming a member of the EU opened Ireland up, and you suddenly see a kind of cafe society appearing in Dublin, and people travelling much more. The other issue that we see in the 1990s is mass immigration into Ireland, which radically alters the nature of society there. And in many ways, that strengthened the Catholic Church, because you have Poles and Romanians coming in, many of whom stay faithful.
Of the Catholic faith.
Indeed,
right.
and the Polish Church is now, funnily enough, sending over missionaries to Poland to look after its communities there.
But their faith, does it tend to be of an earlier generation, a more, and no disrespect intended, but a simpler faith that's quite prepared to accept the tenets of Catholicism and the rules and regulations that each pope hands down?
No, I don't think so. I've always found the Polish Catholic faith to be quite questioning. The Catholic faith in Ireland, I think, was simpler up until the 1960s, 1970s. And then you see a real questioning beginning that has led to the divorce referendum, led to the abortion referendum, led to the momentous same-sex marriage constitutional change that we've just seen. And in many ways, I would argue that it will lead to a renewal in the Catholic Church in Ireland, because it will make it rethink its place within society.
And yet you don't think that if, Harry, when this vote is held on this decision, this poll as to whether or not abortion should be allowed, if that goes ahead, it goes against one of the fundamental tenets of the Catholic teaching about birth control, doesn't
Yes, it does, yeah. And one of the greatest challenges that Pope Francis has faced is his desire to allow priests to absolve women who ask for repentance for abortions. That's one of them. He's come up with some of his most fierce criticism over that. So yeah, it flies right in the face of some key Catholic doctrine about the beginning of life and contraception as well.
So he's a moderniser in that degree, but he hasn't gone so far as to saying in some circumstances, or more circumstances that pertain at the moment, abortion is permitted or to be encouraged.
Well, I think moderniser is a slightly tricky word. He is looking to allow some pastoral leniency to the Catholic rules. He's not actually looking to change any of their rules, and I think he's actually he's very firm that marriage is still between one man and one woman and so on. But he is wanting priests to perhaps encourage a little bit more grace and leniency with applying those same rules. So he is seen as a liberaliser and a moderniser. That's not always fair.
Therein lies a wonderful conundrum, being more lenient and yet still holding on to the old rules. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment. You're watching Insight. Coming up, we'll examine the state of the Catholic faith right around the world. It is still the biggest Christian church on the planet.